Tour guides, what's the stupidest thing a tourist did? I worked at the visitor center in Gettysburg for a while. Here are some of my favorites. Some of them personally overheard, some of them passed down via word of mouth. Do they take the monuments in at night, or just leave them on the battlefield? Why aren't there any bullet holes in the monuments? Oh, I didn't have any ancestors back then.
Sounds like you had some interesting moments there. People often have odd questions about history. It's funny how some can't grasp the reality of the past, like they think monuments are brought in at night or something. And the ancestor comment really shows how disconnected some folks feel from historical events. It's a reminder that history can seem distant to many.
Not a tour guide, but a park ranger in Banff told me a story about a couple of European tourists who asked him where they could see some bears. The ranger mentions a few spots where bears are known to be and cautions them to be careful. The next year he saw the same couple and they thanked him and showed him some pictures they had taken. In one of them there was a picture of the wife holding a black bear cub and smiling. The ranger kind of lost it on them.
That's a wild story. I get why the ranger flipped out. It's one thing to see a bear from a distance, but getting close like that is just reckless. It's good to hear that they had some cool pictures, but you really shouldn't mess with wildlife. Respect for nature matters, and it can put you in some dangerous situations. Hope they learned their lesson.
In the hills of North Carolina, where Floridians flock in the summer to escape the summer heat, elderly Floridian gets out of his Cadillac and scans the surrounding hills as the mechanic pumps gas for him. You must have a lot of inbred types in these hills. Mechanic shifts his jaw from one cheek to the other. Yup, looks the Floridian over, but they mostly go back home in the fall. Spitz.
It's interesting how perceptions differ between folks. The Floridian's casual comment shows a lack of understanding of the area. The mechanic's straightforward response is a reminder that rural life often has its own characters. Different lifestyles clash in moments like this, showing the divide between city and country. It's a small but telling glimpse into how people outside their comfort zones react.
Not exactly a tour guide, but I worked at a museum one summer. I was giving a speech on the sharks near the shark tank. At the end of it, people normally come up and ask questions. One woman pushes me aside and whispers, "Is it true that men get periods on full moons?" I told her no, but to this day I wonder if that's just me.
That sounds like an interesting experience at the museum. It's funny how people can come up with the strangest questions. The full moon thing is definitely a unique belief. I guess you never really know what people are thinking. It's kind of nice to have those unexpected moments, though. Makes for a memorable summer job, I'd say.
Visitor. You're not from around here, are you? Me. Actually, I am, born and raised. Visitor. Well, I've been coming to the South for 25 years, and you just don't seem like you're from here. Me. Well, my parents don't have strong accents either. Visitor. I just think I would like you better if you had a Southern accent. Sorry that playing up to stereotypes is not in our visitor services manual. I'm here to talk about history, not recreate your Southern fantasy.
It's funny how people have certain expectations based on where you're from. I once had a similar experience. I was traveling and someone assumed I'd have a thick accent. I told them I was from a city, and they were surprised. It's just interesting how folks can have these ideas about others based on stereotypes. In the end, it's all about who you are, not how you sound.
In Wyoming, it is common to buy bear spray, highly concentrated pepper spray, when heading into Yellowstone. One tourist believed it was bear repellent, lined up his family, and sprayed all of them. Chemical burns for everyone. As a raft guide, we regularly got asked whether we would be passing the same spot / going through the same rapid later in the journey. We would reply, "Why, yes, this is actually one of the only circular rivers in the world." Question, how deep is the river? Hey, about chest high on a duck.
That bear spray story is wild. You'd think someone would check first. It's crazy how people skip basic info. As for guiding, it sounds amusing dealing with those questions. The river depth response is funny too. It's all about finding humor in situations, I guess. People just want to know what's ahead, even if it means asking silly questions. It's all part of the experience.
I was on one of those big bus tours of San Francisco in the evening. Last ride for the night. The tour guide probably mentioned 5 times before leaving that it would be freezing up top and that no one could go up or down the stairs during the hour tour because it was dangerous. This couple was at the top with their infant, wearing nothing but a onesie with a thin bed sheet over the carrier. The tour guide suggested multiple times that they stayed downstairs since it would be freezing. Well, it felt something like 30 degrees or less, and the poor baby was crying the entire time before we had to pull over after 30 to 40 minutes so the couple could take their popsicle baby inside the bus to thaw out. Best parents of the year, choosing a better view over their baby's well-being.
It's wild how some people think being outside is worth more than comfort, especially for a baby. You'd think common sense would kick in, but I guess they wanted the view so bad. It's not just about the sights, you know? That kid was clearly struggling, and they just sat there. The tour guide tried warning them, but some folks just don't listen. A memorable night, for sure, just not in a good way.
When I was in France touring World War I and World War II memorials, the actual tour guide didn't speak English, so I was commissioned to be the translator for all the British and American tourists. I was assistant to the regional tour guide, so I hope my story counts. We were at Verdun, and it was a pretty free-for-all tour where the kids could somewhat play alongside the crater's edges to really drive home the eeriness of a war zone overtaken by normalcy. Anyway, middle-aged American bimbo says, "Wow, all of the craters and hills here must have been really convenient for the fighting. They're lucky they picked such a location. Lady, are you for real?"
That sounds pretty wild. It's like people can be completely oblivious to the gravity of a place. You're there in the middle of a historic war site, and someone's casually commenting on the convenience of the terrain. It's a strange mix of history and modern life. I guess you have to expect some unusual reactions from tourists sometimes. It's definitely a moment to remember.
My uncle was a tour guide in Iceland some time ago. He once guided a group of Americans around the country and stopped at a glacier in the middle of nowhere. He explained to the group that this glacier had been here for thousands of years and that it doesn't melt. The group then went back to the bus to carry on, but my uncle notices that a woman was carrying a big piece of the glacier towards the bus. So he stops her and says, "I'm sorry, you can't bring that onto the bus, it will melt." The woman quickly responded, "But you said it doesn't melt." My uncle stood there for a while, dumbfounded by the amount of stupidity that was in that answer, before finally saying, "Okay, but you'll have to put it in your backpack and keep it in there for the whole journey." The woman readily agreed and started to empty her backpack to make space for the big block of ice. Needless to say, this didn't end well for the woman, as the ice obviously melted in her bag.
That's a classic example of not understanding what you're dealing with. I've had moments like that too, where you just have to facepalm at people's responses. It's funny, though, how some can take things so literally. Like when a friend tried to keep a snowball in her pocket. Ended up with wet pants. Stupid, but you can't help but laugh about it later. Just a reminder to think a bit more sometimes.
Not a guide, but I recently returned from a hiking trip to Yosemite. I was astonished by the amount of people who were so unprepared for the strenuous hikes. I witnessed people wearing flip-flops and ladies carrying sparkly high-priced handbags on hikes. Good grief. Surely they had some idea where they were going. It's not like they were dropped off by a friend who yelled surprise.
That's wild. I remember a similar thing when I went hiking with friends once. There was this guy in jeans and dress shoes trying to keep up with us on a tough trail. He kept saying he wanted to enjoy nature, but man, he looked so out of place. It made the whole hike a bit awkward, but at least we had a laugh about it later. Guess not everyone gets the memo.
When I was in Paris, I witnessed two older American women aggressively trying to force a store clerk to accept US dollar bills. She was like, just go to the kiosk down the street, they will change these bills for you, and I'll be happy to sell you what you want. They were like, this is good American money.
That's an interesting scene. It's funny how some people think their money speaks everywhere. I remember seeing tourists act like they were in charge when they clearly didn't understand the local customs. It's like they forget they're in someone else's country. Just a reminder that being a traveler means adapting, not demanding.
When I was in Yellowstone National Park, a tourist, or Turon deaf, a mix between a tourist and a moron, was trying to take a picture with some buffalo. He had his child, probably 3 years old, with him, and he was walking towards the buffalo. His wife was holding the camera, ready to take the picture. I knew that he was trying to put his kid onto the buffalo or pose with it or something else immensely idiotic. Fortunately, a park ranger stopped him before anything serious happened. Apparently, this is fairly common in Yellowstone, and most people are maimed or killed. Wild animals are wild, stay away.
That's wild. People really don't think sometimes. It's crazy how some will put their kids in dangerous situations just for a photo. Glad the ranger was there to step in. It's a reminder that wildlife should be respected. You don't mess around with animals like that. Yellowstone is beautiful, but some folks just don't get the risks involved. Better to stay safe and enjoy the view from a distance.
Yellowstone National Park tourists. Where do they put the animals in winter? At the beginning of a river raft float, so the boat ends back here, right? Yes, ma'am. This is a circular river dive. Finally, a question so stupid, you wonder how they came up with it. What time of the year do the deer turn into elk?
It's funny how some people really don't think before they ask. I remember a trip to a national park with friends where someone asked if alligators could survive in the snow. We were all just confused and laughed it off. Nature questions can be wild. The mix of curiosity and cluelessness is always entertaining, especially when you're outdoors and trying to soak it all in.
I'm not a tour guide, but I am an asshole. I worked at a magical theme park and had a woman come up to ask me a question. I stood in front of the pirate ride, dressed as a pirate, and she asked, "Where is the pirate ride?" I looked up at the big sign, then back at her, then again at the sign, then to her. She became frustrated I wasn't answering her, so she asked me again louder, "Where is the pirate ride?" I pointed to the train to my left, told her to take the train to the 4th exit and get off, and it will be on your right. The train has 4 total exits, and as I got on my break, I was walking away, just in time to see her get off the train and angrily flip me off. Then get on the pirate ride.
That sounds like a classic mix-up. I've had moments like that too. One time, I was at a movie theater and someone asked me where the restroom was. I just pointed down the hall, but it ended up being a long walk. They looked so annoyed when they finally found it. Sometimes people really don't want to hear the obvious, and it's funny to see their reactions. Just part of the job, I guess.
I was in France on a school trip. We were headed from Nice to Paris. There was an aqueduct built by the Romans along the route, so we stopped. There was a small crepe stand, so we get crepes. These 2 girls, who were not affiliated with my school, get up and start demanding hamburgers. You know, hamburgers? I finally said to them that they knew what a hamburger was, but they made crepes and crepes only.
That sounds like an interesting trip. I get how it is when people are just in their own world. It's funny how some can be so vocal about what they want, totally missing the vibe of the place. I guess they just didn't get it. But at least you enjoyed some crepes in a cool spot, which is what counts. Sometimes those unexpected moments make for the best stories later on.
Sister works as at a restaurant in Bar Harbor, Maine, a popular tourist town and cruise ship stop. Some gems. Are those islands in the bay real? Who turns all the boats in the water to face the same way? Where are all the military ships? This person thought Pearl Harbor occurred there, because apparently there is only one harbor in the US.
It's funny how people can be so clueless sometimes. My friend used to get those kinds of questions all the time when he worked at a tourist spot. You'd think basic geography would stick, but no. The questions about boats and military ships just show how some tourists can be completely lost. It's wild to think about how little some people know about the places they visit.
I used to work as a tour guide for the college I go to. As part of my job, I gave Segway tours to prospective students and their families. One time I was with a couple families, and one of them had a 10-year-old boy with them. I was leading them through the tour, and at one point we were in a parking lot getting ready to park the Segways before heading inside a building. The 10-year-old boy had gotten off of his too early and was trying to get back on to catch up to the rest of the group. Instead of getting on the Segway, when it's stationary like you're supposed to, the kid tried to jump on after getting a running start. He completely flipped over the front of the Segway and landed helmet first on the parking lot concrete. He was fine, but instead of checking on him like a good tour guide, I started laughing uncontrollably. As you can guess, I wasn't that family's favorite person after that.
That sounds like a moment that could have gone very wrong. I mean, a helmet helps, but still, seeing a kid wipe out like that must have been surprising. It's kind of funny how instinct just kicks in sometimes, and you can't help but laugh. I get that being a tour guide means you're supposed to keep it together, but it's hard when things get wild like that. I guess you learned a lesson on how to handle unexpected situations.
Not a tourgee, but was at a tourist beach thing, and there were probably 40 Chinese people just taking photos of these motorcycles in a line. One man went so far as to sit on one of the bikes and took pictures of his kinds climbing on it. One of the bikes got knocked over, and the tourist did not even care. That row of bike belonged to patched members of the Hells Angels. The bikers did nothing except scream at them to leave, or some bad things were going to happen. I felt scared at what they were going to do. Edit. Angles/angels are all the same to a mathematician.
That sounds like a pretty intense scene. I've seen similar things before, where tourists can be oblivious to their surroundings. The idea of a row of Hells Angels bikes being treated like props is wild. I guess that guy thought it was just a photo op. It must have been awkward when the bikers started yelling. I can only imagine how tense that felt, being in the middle of it all.
Wasn't really stupid, but annoying. I'm French-Canadian, and I was giving some information to 4 French tourists, and suddenly I noticed that this woman had her camera pointed at me. I'm embarrassed, but I still keep giving the information, and at the end they all start laughing. At this point, my face is red, and I'm feeling super uncomfortable. I asked the woman if she was filming me, and she says, "Yes, your accent is too funny. I have to show that to my friends in France." Basically, I felt like some kind of freak show, and that woman didn't even ask me before starting to film. She just put the camera in front of my face, which was really disrespectful. Let me tell you that I'm very self-conscious, and I felt a bit shitty after that.
That situation does sound pretty uncomfortable. It's awkward when someone puts you on the spot like that, especially without asking. Can't imagine how it felt to know you were being filmed for laughs. It's tough when you're just trying to help and then end up feeling like you're being judged. People can be disrespectful, and it's frustrating when they don't recognize that. At least you handled it calmly, though.
When my family went to Ireland, my younger brother walked up to the bartender in a small pub and ordered an Irish car bomb. The bartender explained that he had just ordered the Irish equivalent to a 9/11 tower collapse in America. He said it was okay because he had bartended on a cruise ship, so he knew what my brother meant. He also said never to order that drink in Ireland again.
That's kind of wild. Your brother probably didn't realize the weight behind that name. It's interesting how certain phrases or drinks can have such different meanings in different places. Good on the bartender for giving him a heads up, though. You can see how things can get lost in translation with humor and culture. Definitely a story to remember for future pub visits.
Not a tourist, but I overheard this conversation between two American tourists on a Eurostar train waiting to depart Paris for London. What time does the train depart? I'm not sure. The ticket only has military, 24-hour time on it. I wish they would use normal time. It's offensive to us Americans who don't understand military time. As an American who is capable of subtracting 12 from a number, all I could do was lay my head in my palms and wish I could smack them across the face.
Sounds like a classic case of cultural differences. It's wild how some folks struggle with basic things like time formats. I get that it's not what they're used to, but complaining about it isn't going to help. Sometimes, you just need to adjust and figure it out. Just makes you shake your head, really?
I went on a cruise to Alaska one summer. One of the other passengers, a girl in her early 20s, packed only bikinis, short shorts, and tank tops. One of the landing party tour guides asked her why she didn't pack more warmly. She said it was because the Weather Channel always shows Hawaii and Alaska right next to each other. I gave up on the human race right then.
That's a wild choice for packing. You'd think she'd check the weather for Alaska specifically. There's a big difference between sunny beaches and cold, rainy shores. I guess some people just don't get it until they're actually there. It's hard to believe someone could think those two places are similar, though. Makes you wonder how they got that far without realizing it.
Not at your guide, but once on one in the UK, the guide was asking where everyone was from and making conversation. Ooh, Paris, I've been there, etc. And these two guys responded. Guys, Slovenia. Guide. Oh, right. Absolute silence. The two guys got offended and started complaining. Guys, you British don't even know where Slovenia is. You know nothing about us. Awkward silence, me trying to be helpful. Well, the capital city is Ljubljana. Ljubljana, pretty sure I pronounced it wrong. Stares and awkward silence guide. Well, anyway, we were all on a lift that took forever, which made it even more tedious.
A similar thing happened to me. On a group trip, someone asked where I was from. When I said my small town, all I got was blank stares. I tried to explain its charm, but no one seemed interested. It got really awkward, especially when one person turned it into a joke. I just sat there, wishing the elevator would get to the ground floor already. Silence made it worse.
I was at the Vatican with a friend. He is Jewish and had never been in a Catholic church before. He saw a priest and parishioner enter a confessional. He yelled out loudly across the vast interior of the cathedral, "Hey guys, this is just like the movies." He then began taking pictures through the screens on the confessional.
That's funny. I can picture your friend in that moment, just really excited about the whole thing. It's interesting how people react to different places. A Catholic church is definitely a different vibe, especially for someone who's never been. I bet it was an awkward but memorable scene. It's one of those moments that shows how curiosity can lead to unexpected interactions. Just made the whole experience a bit more lively, I guess.
I'm not a tour guide, but I work in NYC and commute daily. Tourists, when you fan your entire family out across a walkway gawking at the awe and wonder, in reality a disgusting subway tunnel, thus making it so that people can't pass you, we will immediately want to shank you. Don't block the way in NYC. Ever.
I get that. Commuting in NYC can be intense. It's like this unspoken rule to keep moving. Tourists can be really clueless, acting like they're in a museum instead of a busy city. I remember once, a family was taking pictures right in front of the subway entrance, and everyone had to squeeze around them. It just slows everything down. It's just a different vibe in the city. Keep it moving.
I was a tour guide on the Missouri in Pearl Harbor, and people would ask me things like, why are there so many Japs on board? Or, why is the deck made out of wood if we showed them Japs that we could defeat them with firebombs? I'm Japanese as well, and I would either immediately call them out and tell them that they couldn't use that language on board the ship, or give them a phenomenal tour and talk to them afterwards about whether or not they enjoyed my tour. Most of the time they did, and I would just say as nicely as possible, well, I'm Japanese myself, and this ship is a part of my history too. Also, one time a lady brought a beach towel and laid it on the deck and just sunbathed. Also, male tourists would request for a male tour guide because they figured the girls didn't know anything.
It's wild how people ask questions without thinking. I remember when my friend got similar comments at a history site. He handled it by educating folks, but it was frustrating. Some people just don't get the impact of their words. Also, the beach towel story is classic. People think they can do whatever. It's just a reminder that every space has a history, and respect is key.
I'm not a tour guide, but one time when I was in Walt Disney World, me and my parents were standing in line for the Rock and Roller Coaster in Hollywood Studios, and some lady with her 2 kids, I think it might have actually only been one, tried to cut the entire line. When she got up to us about 1/3 of the way in, we all stood making a wall so they couldn't get through, and they were acting all confused like, what are they doing? And the people in line around us started clapping for us, and one of the cast members came up and escorted them back to the end of the line. The things people think they can get away with.
That's pretty wild. It's funny how people try to bend the rules in places like Disney. I remember a similar situation when I was waiting for a ride. Someone tried to cut in, and everyone started shaking their heads. The vibe changed, and the staff noticed. It's kind of nice when people band together like that. You'd think a place full of families would have more respect for the line.
I'm not a tour guide, but this summer I visited the Terracotta Warriors while I was in China. There wasn't much to do, to be honest, as it was just a few gigantic pits in the ground filled with the sculptures, but I did overhear this really interesting story from a tour guide. Apparently, a few weeks before I went, a French guy visited. He was a huge fan of the Warriors, and even went so far as to dress up as one for his visit. Somehow he thought that it would be a good idea to go into one of the pits, aka the pits that only archaeologists and important world leaders are allowed to go into. Fortunately for him, security actually took a while to find him, as his costume made him blend in with the Warriors. When security did find him, though, he was promptly kicked out of the country and blacklisted from ever visiting again.
That sounds like an interesting trip. The guy really went all out with the costume. I mean, trying to sneak into a pit is pretty bold. It's funny how he blended in, but it just goes to show how serious some places take their rules. Getting kicked out for that must have been a wild ending to his adventure. Guess he learned the hard way that some things are off limits.
I got asked what sweet tea was. I responded tea with sugar. I also once got asked where the giraffe was as we toured through a salt marsh. I'm still not sure what prompted that question, but I responded that sometimes at high tide it steps in the sinkholes, and the only thing you can see above the grass is those 2 tufts on the top of its head. They believed me.
That's funny how people can get confused. The sweet tea question is straightforward, but the giraffe one is random. I guess some folks just think outside the box. I remember when a friend asked me about a penguin while we were at a beach. I just went along with it and said they sunbathe sometimes. It's interesting how our minds work in strange directions.
Everglades National Park. Huge group of Chinese comes to eat at our small restaurant. They sit down and ask for 10 hot waters and 5 American burgers. So I get them their burgers. They then take forks, and one person would take the top bun and stab it and then eat the bun like a corn dog on a stick. The next in line would stab the patty, hold it up in the air, and eat it like a patty on a stick. The next person would stab the bottom bun and eat it on a stick, and so on. Every person had just a bun to eat or a patty. So bizarre.
That's an interesting way to eat burgers. I've seen people get creative with food, but this takes it up a notch. I once had a friend who would eat sushi with a fork just to be different. It's funny how food can be such a cultural experience. People find their own methods, and sometimes those methods are just plain weird. Guess you never know until you see it.
In France, we were dispatching a tour to Nice and Ease. Pronounced correctly sounds like Nice and Ez, but when it was called over the intercom, no one moved. We tried again, and still no one budged. Finally, we tried again with Nice and Easy, and everyone jumped up and headed to the bus. The FFS people.
That's pretty funny. Sometimes you gotta dumb things down a bit, I guess. I've had instances where I had to shout a bit to get people moving. It's like people just zone out when they hear something too straight-laced. You would think the place name would get their attention, but nope, it took a little twist to wake them up. Just goes to show how simple wording can make a difference.
As with most everyone else, I'm not a tour guide, just knowledgeable about the area I live in and used to come into contact with a lot of tourists in and around Yellowstone. Just posted this last night, but it's worth repeating. At what elevation do deer turn into elk? And the ever-glorious, it's like 80 degrees down here. What's that white stuff up on top of the mountain? Do people spray, paint the mountain to look like there's snow? And the countless tards that walk up to wild animals in the park, thinking it's a big zoo.
It's interesting how people experience the outdoors. I remember when my friend thought it was a good idea to pet a deer at a park. He got close, and the deer just looked at him like he was crazy. Then there's the constant questions about wildlife, like the snow question. It's a reminder that not everyone knows the basics. Sometimes you just have to laugh at their lack of understanding.
During the G.W. Bush administration, I was in Thailand at a coffee shop. A big, loud, friendly American was making conversation with all the white people in there, moving from group to group. He was talking to two elderly German tourists, and they mentioned President Bush, and he compared him to a Nazi. The two German tourists went very quiet, and the woman said, "My husband lived under Hitler's regime." The American perked up and said, "Then you know exactly what I'm talking about, pal."
That's an interesting moment. You get a mix of cultures and perspectives in a coffee shop. The American seemed to think he was connecting on a deeper level, but he didn't read the room well. It's funny how people think they can throw around heavy comparisons without considering the personal experiences of others. The Germans probably weren't ready for that kind of conversation, especially given their history.
I'm not a tour guide, but I used to sell the tickets for city tour buses in Edinburgh. Two American couples came to me looking for tickets, and it was quiet, so I ended up chatting to them for a while. They were friendly people. They really struggled to grasp the ticket system. Most people don't have a problem with it, but these people had come straight from a cruise ship and seemed quite tired, so I just put their confusion down to them being on a long and tiring holiday. Then I had this exchange with one of the women. I used to live in Glasgow about 20 years ago. How far are we from Glasgow? Me, oh, cool. I'm not sure the exact distance, but I think it's about 45 miles. It's 50 minutes by train. Oh, so not that far then. I always thought they were further apart. Then her husband asked me a question about the tours, so I answered him. That probably took a minute or so. Are we in Glasgow now? It's not like this even took place on a moving bus. We were standing on the pavement.
I remember when I worked at a ticket counter in Edinburgh. I had this chat with a couple from America who were lost about the distance to Glasgow. The woman told me she had lived there years ago but couldn't wrap her head around where we were. After explaining it was quite a ways away, she asked if we were in Glasgow. Honestly, it felt like they needed a map for everything.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.